When you think of a lake, you probably picture something calm, right? Serene. But what if I told you that some lakes are hiding a terrifying secret just beneath their surface? That they're actually geological time bombs, capable of erupting without any warning, releasing this invisible cloud of death. These are the stories of the world's exploding lakes and the unbelievable threat that's still waiting.
So, our story starts in a pretty remote part of Cameroon, back in August of 1984. It was just a totally normal night. People were driving down a road that went past this small, peaceful lake called Lake Manoon. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at all. But the next morning, something was terribly wrong. A horrifying discovery was made. 37 people, some still in their cars, others on their motorcycles, were just found dead along that stretch of road. All their livestock, everything nearby, was dead too. And here's the part that just completely baffled the first responders and doctors. There were no wounds, no signs of a struggle. It was as if every living thing in that area had just silently stopped breathing. So this was the central mystery, right? With no obvious cause, no weapon, no warning, how could so many people die at the exact same time, in the exact same way? What was this invisible killer? In the aftermath, you can just imagine the confusion and the fear. With no obvious answers on the table, some really wild theories started to pop up as everyone struggled to understand what happened at Lake Manoon. The theories were all over the place. The terrified locals started whispering about attacks from evil spirits. The government, on the other hand, suspected something far more sinister. And at first, they called it a chemical attack by terrorists. But none of it really made any sense. I mean, why would anyone attack such a remote, rural area? To try and get to the bottom of it, they called in an Icelandic volcanologist named Haraldur Sigurdsson. He suspected the answer might not be man-made at all, but natural. And so his investigation turned toward the one thing at the center of it all, the lake itself. He looked for signs of a typical volcanic eruption, but found nothing. But then he took a water sample from the very bottom of the lake, and as he brought it to the surface, he noticed something absolutely incredible. The water started to fizz and bubble violently, just like, in his words, a freshly opened bottle of soda. And that fizzing, that was the clue to everything. That one little detail, the fizzing water sample, unlocked the entire mystery. It pointed to a rare, bizarre, and frankly terrifying natural phenomenon that almost no one had ever even heard of before. It's called a limnic eruption, and to put it simply, it's when a lake literally explodes with dissolved carbon dioxide gas. This gas, since it's heavier than air, forms a silent, invisible cloud that just hugs the ground and suffocates anything that breathes. So how on earth does a lake explode? Well, it's a process that builds for centuries, in a few key steps. First, you've got CO2 from volcanic activity seeping into the bottom of a deep lake. Because the water way down there is so cold and under so much pressure, it can hold huge amounts of this dissolved gas. Over hundreds of years, the lake becomes this ticking time bomb. All it needs is a trigger, a landslide, an earthquake, anything, to disturb that bottom layer, and the whole thing erupts at once. So Sigurdsson publishes his groundbreaking theory, and he's warning people that other lakes in the region could be just as dangerous. But the whole idea of an exploding lake was just so strange, so unheard of, that a lot of people in the scientific community just dismissed it. They simply couldn't believe it was possible. Tragically, just 2 years later, his theory would be proven correct in the most horrific way imaginable. So 2 years after the incident at Lake Manoun, it happened again at nearby Lake Nos. Only this time, the death toll wasn't 37, it was 1,746 people. A massive eruption at Lake Nyos released an estimated 300,000 tons of CO2 gas. The cloud rolled down into the surrounding valleys, suffocating entire villages in their sleep. It killed people, 3,500 head of livestock. They said it even killed the insects. After that, the world could no longer ignore the danger. After the absolute horror of Lake Nyos, the scientific community mobilized. The question wasn't what was happening anymore, it was how to stop it. They had to find a way to defuse these ticking time bombs before they could erupt again. And the solution they came up with was actually pretty elegant. Starting in the early 2000s, scientists installed these massive pipes that went all the way down into the gas-rich bottom layers of the lakes. They acted like giant straws, safely siphoning the carbon dioxide out. By 2019, after years and years of work, both lakes were finally declared safe. So the stories of Monoon and Nyos have a happy ending, which is great. But the threat of these limnic eruptions, it's far from over. In fact, the world's deadliest lake is still sitting there, waiting. And it's orders of magnitude more dangerous. Meet Lake Kivu. It's on the border of the DRC and Rwanda, and it just dwarfs the disaster at Lake Nyos. We're not talking about a few thousand people at risk anymore. Lake Kivu threatens 2 million. And it doesn't just have CO2, it's also saturated with huge quantities of flammable methane gas. I mean, the sheer scale of the difference is staggering. If the amount of gas that erupted from Lake Nyos is this small bar right here, then the gas currently trapped in Lake Kivu is this massive one. It's estimated to be large enough to hold the equivalent of 50 Lake Nyoses. So this is what makes Lake Kivu a catastrophe on a totally different level. It's huge, it has explosive methane, it's surrounded by a massive population, and it's located in a politically volatile region. All of that makes any kind of large-scale engineering solution incredibly difficult and dangerous to pull off. And you can see right here how the danger just increases exponentially. When you go from Magnon to Nyos to Kivu, every single variable, the depth, the complexity of the gas, and most critically, the number of human lives at stake just skyrockets. You know, when you lay it all out, it's this terrifying progression. Lake Monoon was a warning shot. Lake Nyos was a tragedy that showed the world just how devastating a limnic eruption could be. But Lake Kivu represents a potential humanitarian and natural disaster on a scale that is really, really hard to even comprehend. And while there are some efforts underway to extract the methane for power, they're moving incredibly slowly. And that leaves us with this terrifying unanswered question. With millions of lives in the balance, can this ticking time bomb be defused before it inevitably goes off?